So you want to know about taxes. All right, this is the first of two tutorials about taxes and elasticity. In this tutorial, we'll look at how taxes look, especially with regards to elasticity. And in the second tutorial, we'll talk about the deadweight loss and the cost of taxation. So, as usual, it's a good question to ask at the beginning of any of these endeavors. Why is this issue worth learning about? And the answer would be, from the economist's perspective, to save you from the hell of mistakenly believing the following lies. Mistakenly understanding policies like a new $1 tax on cigarettes means my smokes will cost me $1 more. Not true. So what does it actually look like to place a tax on a good that didn't have the tax before? Well, for sure it's going to place a difference between the price that the buyers pay and the price that the sellers receive. And there's more details that I can give you on this, but basically suffice it to say that it doesn't matter who the tax is placed on, the buyers or the sellers, the outcome is going to be the same. The buyer price will be above the seller price by the amount of the tax. We call it the tax wedge. Let's say this tax were $40. We would see that there's a $40 distance between the buyer and the seller price. So, for instance, at this level here, there's about $40 difference between buyer and seller price. And what you can do is basically, once you're given the size of the tax, you can find the correct positioning of the tax wedge just by looking where is the demand curve above the supply curve by exactly $40. For instance, if you know the tax is $10 high, right? So I can measure it by the vertical distance over here on the y-axis. Basically, I can find where there's $10 difference between the buyers and the sellers, and that's about here where we've got $10 difference. So here's a practice question, an application question for you. You can pause it and work it out. But basically you're looking for the vertical distance between the buyer's price, the price that the demanders are paying, and the price that the sellers are receiving. And it looks like that vertical distance is 25 minus 15 or 10. Now, it's a question some of you may have, well, how come there's that difference between the buyer price and the seller price? That's the amount going to the government in revenue. Right, so if the buyer is the one being charged the tax by the government, they have to remit the tax, they pay $15, the price that the sellers are willing to accept, and then they send $10 along to the government, so they pay the grand total of $25. If the sellers are the ones being taxed, the sellers receive $25 that the buyers are willing to pay, but they've got to send $10 back to the government for a grand total of $15. So no matter what happens, the buyers will pay $25 here and the sellers will pay $15, exactly vertically distinct by $10, or the size of the tax. So to answer the question of why does a $1 cigarette tax not mean that my smokes will be exactly $1 more expensive, let's turn to a $1 tax on gasoline. The answer is two parts. The answer is that it depends on the relative elasticity between buyer and seller, who is more sensitive to price. And it turns out the party that is more sensitive is going to end up being able to escape most of the pain of the tax. The inelastic party, the party that isn't as sensitive to price, will end up being stuck with more of the bill of that tax. And you can see why right here. So if we draw the $1 wedge, we see that compared to the original equilibrium price, which was $2 a gallon, the buyer price, and that is just follow the top of the wedge here and you find what the buyers are paying, it's $2.95, and the seller price is $1.95. And that means that although both buyer and seller share in the pain of this tax, clearly the burden is felt more by the buyer. And if you're looking for an intuitive explanation of this, think about how the buyer and the seller behave in this example. The sellers will realize that they can pass along the cost of the tax and charge more for the gas, and they won't lose too much sales at all. So they will go ahead and do that. In this case, the sellers are more elastic than the buyers, and they escape the tax. So a good rule of thumb is the elastic party escapes the tax. Here's an alternate example where the seller, in this case, is the less elastic partner, the more inelastic partner. The buyer is the more elastic partner. The buyer, in this case, gets to escape the tax a little bit more than the seller. So you find that wedge, draw it in there, and you've got, compared to the original equilibrium price of $6, sure, the buyers pay a little bit more, but really, the sellers bear more of the tax, right? So they're receiving a whole lot less than they used to. And that's simply because they're inelastic. The buyers sort of will balk as soon as the price begins to go up. We notice that they buy a lot less than they used to. That's the definition of price elasticity. And so to salvage sales, sellers will have to drop the price quite a bit. And here's an application question for you. The answer is A. Here's a policy question, real-world application. To actually cause changes in consumption patterns, you want people to be sensitive to price. Demand should be elastic.